I was just telling Dr. Karstens, I don't know why this is so hard as I get older. I feel like I'm going to throw up. So I've done this for years. I apologize. And one thing I wanted to say is I can't walk around so much because of this for the recording, and I am such a klutz that if I take this off, and I will break something, for sure, for sure, for sure. And I don't know, this feels like a weird talk, and I want you to know, I don't think I've ever worked so hard on a talk I'm giving. Like, no matter where I've spoken, as in like my colleagues at the Plantain Mauritius. And I think because of the world right now, right? I think the world is very heavy no matter what. And I am someone who is still the first person in my family to go to university. And I wanted to start my talk by saying, I am living proof of what an education can do for you. I had to run away to university, and I'm not joking. Thank God I had a boyfriend with a ladder. I'm not kidding. Suitcase in the bushes, boyfriend with ladder, drove myself to university. So when I tell all of you, I know about your financial struggles. I do. But I'm standing here after 27 years at Ohio Dominican, doing what I love because I had an education. And so I want all of you to understand how lucky you are to have this. And on top of having this, know that we as professors really do go to the mat for you, right? So I want us to see this place, this little room, as a little place of healing, maybe the city of refuge for the wider world. And that's what we do at Ohio Dominican, right? So that wasn't in my talk. This is the third version of my talk because I kept shifting it. But that goes back to the fact that I feel that what I'm going to talk about today is something that can help the world quite a bit and help us individually quite a bit. And so I'm going to talk about art as, in the words of our two latest popes, my pope crushes, City of Refuge, Pope Francis called art the City of Refuge, and Instrument of Peace, that's our beloved Pope Leo XIV, contemporary art and the common good, right? I'm very informal when I talk, and I'm so nervous, so I don't know what today's gonna look like. But what I decided is I'm gonna read the first paragraph for you because my colleague approved this. Art has always had a central role in the Catholic Church, but now, more than ever, is the Church looking to contemporary artists who utilize new media, create works that are truly interactive, that open dialogues between individuals, that speak truth to power, and all while being savvy about using social media. Contemporary art for the common good is Instagrammable, it's TikTokable. So the art itself is a physical destination. People will travel to see these works of art. But people who can't experience it firsthand can experience it virtually and build community that way through the online experience. And I will just refer to the K-pop Pharrell Williams extravaganza that I'll talk about in a little bit that had 80,000 participants actually there and broke records all over the world for the number of shares on Instagram and TikTok, all right? So as we all know, art has always been central to the message of the Catholic Church. Art has always delivered that message. Someone left already, they didn't like what I was saying. Contemporary art is for everyone. It's accessible, it's anti-elitist, and we become part of the art through some sort of interaction, actually. Artists are the ultimate Dominicans. Thank you, Eliana Colley, for that statement. Preaching the common good to the wider world. When I first started here, Sister Marianne Fatula said, "Oh, Janette, always follow a nun. We'll always get someplace faster than anyone else. We'll get the best snacks." Well, she went on and on and on. And what I wanted to say is, in 2025, follow the artists. We're always on the right side of history. We are always speaking for those who can't, for whatever reason, the marginalized, the displaced. And I did not plan to come and talk to you about the church pushing artists and pushing an art that is anti-elitist, that does give voice to those who have no other mechanism for speaking. But that's what this became because of the events of 2025. So that's what so you can either buckle up or, get some lemonade and a cookie when you're leaving. The last kind of overall thought I want to leave you with is someone who has taught the history of art for 27 years here, my beloved art history 150 and 151. Every January I talk about the Counter-Reformation and Caravaggio, the bad boy, who the church again and again commissions to create works, even though he's trying to get a reaction from them. And he writes notes about the reactions he's trying to get, like he's trying to make them mad. But he is so good at what he does. And people are so entranced by what he does that they keep going back to him again and again until he's declared an antichrist and excommunicated. Anyway. I feel like our last two popes are embracing the characteristics of popular culture and looking at mediums of art that would have been scoffed at by the Vatican in the past 30 years or something like this. And in the same way that Catholic art in the 17th century, the great altarpieces of the Baroque, took on the language of popular culture, of theater, drama and light and dark, right? Great action in the compositions. We are taking on the language of popular culture today, and we are making sure that the art that we're commissioning, in terms of the church, is Instagrammable, that it's viral, and I'll show you specific examples of that. All right? Okay. I think at a Catholic university, everyone kind of understands how important art is to our mission, particularly a Dominican institution, right? We have the most amazing heritage of artists. But just in case anyone doesn't know this, Pope Francis was a great fan of the arts and amazingly, incredibly progressive artists. And one of the things I found doing some research for this talk is that the artists that he commissioned for various jubilees and things like this were far more progressive than what he was saying. And it takes me back to a conversation with Dr. Karstens years ago that sometimes visual artists can speak a truth in ways that the written word can't accomplish. Does that make sense? Right? And so Pope Francis was very, very vocal, wrote a book on art, which is, I think, in the production of being a PBS documentary. It's already been shown to a Vatican audience, actually, but it's all about, what art was to him, what art was in the modern world, how important he thought artists were, not just as custodians of beauty. Artists have always been custodians of beauty, right? But artists as bridge builders, reaching out to the wider world and ultimately presenting a vision of goodness and truth. I wanted to just say a few words. Pope Francis went to the Venice Biennale, the last Venice Biennale, and his address said, "Thank you for what you are and what you do. No human being is a stranger. Beside you, I do not feel like a stranger." He said, "I feel at home." Because art has the status of a city of refuge, a city, let's listen to these words, that disobeys the rule of violence and discrimination in order to create forms of human belonging capable of recognizing, including, protecting, and embracing everyone, starting from the least of society, right? So that's a foundation for contemporary artists working today. Reacting against xenophobia, speaking out against this fear of the poor and the different and the displaced. And then we have our current Pope Leo XIV. Who would have known I would have had 2 Pope crushes in my adult life? But Pope Leo, and I will tell you, I was really worried about. I didn't know anything about our baseball Pope, right? As an art historian, I could not be happier. The more I find out about him, the happier I am. In, I think, his inaugural talk, he referred to Vincent van Gogh's Sower at Sunset. And I think all of us, how many of you have heard of Vincent van Gogh? Raise your hand. Just about everybody, right? He did not sell one work in his life. He was considered, he was no one, he was ill. His brother was an art dealer and he still couldn't sell his brother's art, right? Because his work was so ahead of its time. And Pope Leo talks about the symbol of this, why it's so important to him. But I was thinking, he's doing it because of how avant-garde Van Gogh was. And then what's interesting is while I was doing this, there were just so many news articles popping up about our Pope. This was from a very reliable Vatican news organization. Pope Leo XIV appoints controversial woman as president of the Pontifical Academy of Fine Arts and Letters. Cristiana Perella. And she is the new, top dog of all that is art in terms of education and all of the collections and all of this. And she comes with a lot of controversy. She has curated exhibitions that have addressed every buzzword that one would think would rankle folks in the church. And she has been contracted to engage with the new languages of contemporary art practices. And we're going to see this in just a moment. So new forms, not just painting anymore, right? Not just bronze sculpture, technology, scale, the likes of which we haven't seen before, and an embrace of social media. And the first work that she curated for in her new role was from last spring, and it involved an annual jubilee. And this is one of the centerpieces of this exhibition. And she commissioned Yan Peiming to create a work, Beyond the Wall. And it was created in the jail of Rome. And it involved the active participation of 27 of the inmates. And Yan Peiming does these large-scale portraits of inmates. And I think you can see they're incredibly naturalistic. They're done in watercolor. They're not done in oil paint. He's bucking against this trend of kind of traditional art history. And they're incredibly soulful, and they're incredibly oversized. And they can be seen from the outside of the structure. They can be visited on the inside. Here's a view of somebody walking by at night. So they're quite large, beautifully done. Both genders, many different ethnicities, and these individuals were engaged in comments about, and discussions about what they are going to do after, what they're doing while they're incarcerated, what advice they would give to other people. Really, the artist engaged with them as real humans, not people who are in jail, right? And again, I want you to understand this scale. And so visitors could see this, but outside at night, these portraits are projected in a monumental scale on the outside of the structure. And so people who are passing by can see them and take photographs and post them to social media, but the residents of the prison themselves could also see them. And apparently this was quite the to-do when people would wait to see for their own portrait, to wait for their own portrait to be projected. The very, picture of human dignity, right? So this is a very different version of contemporary art than we've had before, yes? And then last week, when I was starting to get really nervous about this hit my feeds. Did anyone hear about this? Raise your hand if you heard about this, the Grace for the World concert. Grand finale of a world meeting on human fraternity. This is a nice little poster that represented it. This comes from, right, like theaters do this, concerts do this. But look at the people who are this Grace for the World concert. Andrea Bocelli, right? You expect him. Do you expect Pharrell Williams, right? Master of popular music. Jennifer Hudson, John Legend, Bam Bam, K-pop extraordinaire, right? K-pop. And this popped up, this advertisement or this online post from one of the presenters, right? This is taken from her Instagram feed. This is kind of a vision of the Catholic Church reaching out to popular culture. If 80,000 people went to this concert, how many live streamed it? Sorry, didn't look that up. But how many passed around these images, right? And that's very important to this message. And I'm sorry, I could not resist this. Pharrell meeting Pope Leo. Take your sunglasses off, Pharrell, right? But there's one that's even better. And this person, can you see that she is absolutely giving him a stink side eye, right? But then the Pope with Jelly Roll and Bam Bam. I'm sorry, I just had to write that too, all right? So lots of these things. But of course, how many followers does Jelly Roll have? How many followers does Bam Bam have? Millions. And all of those people are going to see this, okay? So it's super savvy. And these things just kept popping up on social media. So a very, I think, careful message to bridge that the church itself and the wider world in the hopes of influencing people, I think, to be more tolerant. And so there was a concert, and the end of the concert had a drone display, we'll call it. But I am really talking about this as in the realm of a contemporary art performance. 3,000 drones over St. Peter's, recreating Michelangelo's masterpieces and a few other things. And I'll be a little repetitive, but they really are extraordinary images. And I think when you see the number of people who are actually there and thinking about the fact that they're actually moving, right? These are still images, of course, but they're really extraordinary. And of course, people from across town taking these photos, people at the concert taking these photos, really this moment for good. Pope Crush, just needed to show you that. But the other reason I wanted to show you that is look at the woman in the front and what she's doing. She's capturing an image, which she's going to put on her feed, and she's going to send to her however many followers, right? And it ends with this. And that is the most important message that's coming out of the contemporary art that is connected with the church right now, right? Because without joy, there's no hope. And Monday, when I sat down to really start to get nervous about my talk, this popped up in my feed. Has everyone heard about this? The murals that were unveiled at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. What's so funny about Peace, Love, and Understanding, a narthex mural? And does anyone know where that title comes from? It's an Elvis Costello song. Does anyone, which is so bizarre to me, because I think they were looking at popular culture, but it's popular culture from like 40 years ago. But anyway, regardless. And just to show you the scale, it's over 1,250 square feet of mural as a traditional tool of church artists. And essentially, the church is called kind of the parish church of the United States. I won't go into how it was founded or anything like this, but know that it's seen as a church built by refugees. And all of the murals are about this flow of refugees into the greatness of New York City. And so on the right-hand side, you see people essentially coming through Ellis Island, 19th century garb, right? All the way to the other side, you have the displaced of today coming into New York City. And in between, we have first responders. We have the children of first responders in a reference to September 11th, kind of making the city great. So it's very clear that this is a message about how great our country is because of immigrants, right? The bishop said, that part of the church was really dreary. We had to do something. So, that's his public statement. But it's really a very, very timely statement, I think, for 2025. I want to point out that compared to the stuff I've just shown you, and compared to the stuff that we're going to look at, it looks a little bit traditional, doesn't it? It's quite bright, but it's traditionally naturalistic. It certainly is quite luminescent. And apparently it is something that people, since it hit the newspapers last Friday, actually, people have been going in just to photograph this. So it seems like it's a destination. But one thing is very clear, the support of immigrants are throughout the structure, which I think is very beautiful. Really, really dense. very dense painting. So art has always been a powerful tool for social and political change. The earliest works of art that we know, cave paintings, were done for the good of community. My students in art in the common good know that, right? In a time when getting enough protein to stay alive was really the most important thing for any group to do, why did we sacrifice one of the hunters to paint these incredibly naturalistic images, right? Because art was something that kind of helped control this, whatever this is at that time. And I think that continues to this day. And I want to now show you some contemporary artists whose works clearly influence the work of the newest kind of artistic mission coming out of the Vatican with Christian Parella, and people that you should know. And this is the artist J.R. Has anyone ever heard of him? French artist, first generation French. What would be called a street artist. He talked about the fact that he was running from the police when he was growing up more than he was studying. And this is a work called Women Are Heroes project that he worked on for 2 years, in which he went to conflict areas, the worst slums in Brazil, on the continent of Africa, around the world. And he interviewed women, and he photographed women. And he recorded all of their stories. He published those stories with the help of an editor. He took documentary photos of them, and then he used those in installations in the cities that the women were from, hoping to then have people interact with images of that individual, hoping to start a dialogue, taking photos of that interaction, hoping to kind of make the trauma that the women had experienced much more public than it had been before, in the hopes of stopping kind of that cycle of violence against women, yes? And so here we have, I believe this is Fortaleza, which is, I think, one of the worst, considered one of the worst slums in the world. It's Brazil, where the World Cup was a couple of years ago. What the heck? And this is what the book was filled with. This is the story of Benedetta Florencia Monteiro. And she talks about this horrible, horrible instance where her grandson was murdered. And he wasn't just murdered, he was cut into pieces and thrown all over the city. So how do you live after that, right? And J.R. is trying to capture, how do you live after something like that? And why don't people know about this? And so the book has these very specific biographies, and then J.R. turns these into public works. We can call them murals in a way. He uses industrial printing processes. So have you ever seen when they wrap the Crew Stadium or the baseball stadium or something like that, or using huge industrial printing mechanisms like this? And so this is a main staircase that goes through that slum in Fortaleza, where this woman's son was brutalized. And again, people recounting her story, which is also in the form of didactics next to this image, but also kind of giving her something back in terms of her own dignity through this representation, right? We know that representation matters. Here's another So they're incredibly varied wherever they are in the world. I think this one was from Liberia, and this is a woman whose entire family was massacred, and yet she still had to go sell produce every day to be able to put food in her own mouth. And so these larger than life, almost confrontations, does that make sense? And one of the things that's important about these is that people do take images of them. If nothing more than because of the scale. So when I use the term Instagrammable or TikTokable, this is really central, right? A few years ago, I was asked to paint huge black and gold wings on the side of this building behind us. I forget what Fitzpatrick Hall, right? Because the hopes were that people from across town would come and stand in front of those wings like they do in Nashville and have their photos taken. And our Ohio Dominican would come up as a destination, right? He's using this sort of element to make people aware of what's happening in these places. This is a work that took place right outside the port of Le Havre in France, which is where a lot of migration comes into Europe. And this is actually an image of the same woman taken in a different session, and her eyes are put together by shipping containers. This is not made through vinyl or anything like that. But this idea is that this is where a lot of political strife around the refugee situation has been a hotbed. And here you have kind of the human element, the eyes. Are they looking to go into that port? Are they saying goodbye to that port and go away? But absolutely no doubt, when I was in a young professor, I had this as a screensaver, and my students were crazy about it. What is it? Where is it? Blah, blah. Asking the questions. JR wants us to ask questions. Contemporary artists want us to ask questions. Pope Leo XIV wants art to make us ask questions. Everyone's favorite JR, right? This is an image of an actual one-year-old on the US-Mexican border near Tecate, I think is how you pronounce it. And here's one image. So again, the same kind of industrial printing production. I love this because you get a sense of how big this is, and also the juxtaposition of adults in uniforms, whatever uniforms they are, right? And a little kid looking over like, what's up, right? And there's no message there that says anything about this, right? But what it does is it makes us stop and think. Why is that baby looking over that? What is that? Is that the border wall? Why is it there? Why is the baby looking over the border wall? Why are the people in uniforms? Et cetera, et cetera. It's just about dialogue. And I can tell you that this became a destination, like for cyclists, cross-country cyclists in the American Southwest would hold tours, would bicycle to this place and get their photo taken with this. And this is JR next to it. He always wears the same fedora, like our own Professor Garland, but JR wears black, not white. Wanted to say that when I saw you walking across campus, but I didn't. But again, just to show you the scale. And also, if you look closely, you can see we're taking this from the American side. The Mexican side is kind of a suburb, right? One of my favorite works. This was an art installation, a performance, a celebration that took place when the baby over the wall was being taken down. And it was this kind of massive event where people on both sides of the wall American, Mexican, had a huge, again, vinyl, like a vinylized cloth, excuse me, of two members of the family, a young woman and an older woman. You can see the difference in age. They had potlucks, so the food was different, the people were different, the age of the person they were sitting around was different, but they had the same music on both sides. JR orchestrated the same kind of musical ensemble. And you can imagine that people sitting around that potluck wouldn't be able to see this, right? They're engaging with the people across from them, they're talking to the people around them, but only from above could someone look down and kind of get the whole view of this performance, of this installation, all right? And again, this really went viral in terms of TikTok and Instagram, and I think it's very beautiful, and I think it causes lots of discussion. I do not want this talk to be about partisan politics or national politics or anything else, and I was very careful about my examples, but conversations are always good, and we need to get better at having conversations with more people. Yes? This is the last work of JR's that I'll show you, and this was actually this is 2022, excuse me, and this was actually on the cover of Time, kind of by mistake. It was not planned to be. And we now kind of see what the language, stylistic language of JR is. This is a huge printed cloth image of a little girl who was 8 years old and was crossing from Ukraine to Poland. And it would take days for families to make this crossing. And JR documented these things. He was very, very concerned about the plight of families with children who are out in the open air, in winter, obviously, at this time. He, through his social media, rallied people to feed the people crossing into Poland on both sides, all of those things just through his social media. And a bit later, created this huge kind of cutout to mimic. Think about, did anybody do Where's Waldo when they were a little kid, right? You cut out the little crayon Where's Waldo, and if you go to visit your grandmother's, you take a photo of it, at your grandmother's. Maybe your grandmother pretends to like play cards with Waldo or something, right? He was kind of doing a What's Waldo with this child. He had his team, and they were pulling this over the border into Poland. And people wanted to help. And so all of the people around this are, let's talk about crowdsourcing, right? Like people who were just there, they wanted to take part in this. And so this work of art crossed a border, this huge child, much more easily than an actual child would have in that time. And that's what journalists wrote about, all right? And again, this was considered such a powerful scene that it was, it still stands as an image of the resilience of Ukraine. This is the perfect segue for the last artist I'm talking about today. And this is someone that I bet a lot of you have heard of before. If you haven't heard of him, you have seen his many imitators, right? Banksy, any of you? I see lots of people nodding their heads. Banksy, kind of the ultimate, what is called street artist. He's a graffiti artist, right? We start to see his stenciled images pop up in London first in about 2002. And they show up in various places around the world, tied into kind of the alternative skater movement, like graffiti, skater, graphic design majors, is what I'll tell you, right? Very big with graphic design majors, right? They ride their skateboard to orientation at ODU. But what was very powerful for me in creating this is I was really at a loss for an artist that I felt would speak to more than JR, that was not a man. And it had to be Banksy. We don't know exactly who Banksy is. He keeps his identity kind of under wraps. He was outed during COVID because his child almost died in a hospital from COVID. And he sold his work and gave the money to the hospital. But one morning, people woke up in war-torn Ukraine, and there were Banksy murals. There were 7 Banksy murals in different cities that had been heavily bombed by Russia. And so in a good part of the world, if a Banksy mural shows up now, somebody's chiseling it out to keep, right? Until last week, that is, when it's just destroyed. But really, like, he does something in London and someone will chisel it out by the end of the day because these sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars now, right? These didn't get touched, except 2 got bombed later. And these were on incredible piles of refuse. And they were created. He introduced these via his social media a day after. People went looking for them, and they were photographed, and those photographs were sent around the world. And this is one of children playing on, I think these metal contraptions, I forget what they're called, but they're set up to, stop runaway cars and things down a street. Here's another. Of course, Eastern Europe has an Olympic reputation in gymnastics, and we'll see ribbon, like they were very early ribbon artists. But on the very rubble of the city, these wonderful images of hope and endurance and all of this. These were meant to be a balm to the people who were around this, but these were also meant to be broadcast around the world through social media, and they were, right? Here's another. This is the ribbon that I was talking about. It debuted maybe, 16 years ago in the Olympics. The Ukrainians are wonderful, but these are meant to be objects of delight. And his own personal Instagram had lots of images like this regular person in Ukraine photographing this wonderful work of art, showing one thing: people care about them. People see what's happening. People see the destruction. And one of my personal favorites, which I call David Letterman in a tub, does look like David Letterman, right? But you can imagine that this could be just one little laugh, right? Can do us all a tremendous amount of good. And that's the power of art. It can make you laugh, it can make you cry. It does great things for our brain chemistry. And this has to be a message. The little kid taking the giant down, right? I think we can see many years later that this has to be about Ukraine and Russia, right? And last week, I woke up to my art newsletter. This image showed up on Banksy's Instagram feed, and he has something like 13 million followers. So this showed up. So all of the folks in London who followed him, who are art people and skateboarders, right, and the culture hounds, things like this, went to find it, looking at some of the things, and this is at the Royal Courts of Justice. And the 4 days before, the courts had prosecuted a large number of protesters who were speaking out against violence in Gaza. And this was Banksy's commentary on this. This is tons of people coming to see this, right? Within 2 hours, this is what it looked like. Okay? It was found at 7 a.m. By 9 a.m., there was this boundary put up. There were films through the day of people like, you've got to let me see it. You've got to let me see it. There were gallery owners threatening or saying that they would make donations to whomever if they could have it, if they could chisel it out. The security guards were not allowed to do that. Social media all over the arts. By the next day, this is what happened. It was taken off with chemicals, and this is what it looks like now. And I think that we can all say that the direction of the contemporary church is that art needs to speak to power. Art needs to speak to truth because there are a lot of people who won't or can't. And art can also do this. This is from 2006, a very early Banksy, of a girl with a balloon. And almost every year from 2006, this girl has shown up in a conflict zone around the world. No text, no nothing. It's just the statement that this continues to happen again and again and again. And so we all have our modalities for addressing the common good. But as someone who has spent a life in art and felt that she has had a life because of art instead of being on an organic potato farm, right? Art speaks truth to power. And find the thing that you're good at and do it beautifully, and you will be addressing the common good.